Hi, and welcome back to the Dreaming and Doing podcast. Today, I am here with TJ Matton, and TJ and I met what feels like many years ago doing brain spotting training together. We haven't been together live in years, but we've been seeing one another on social media. And so I'm really excited to be catching up today
Yeah, for
and
sure.
to be talking with TJ about something that I really love that she's doing. So, to give you some background, TJ is a social worker, psychotherapist, coach, and constructive misbehavior enthusiast, helping adults liberate their mind and bodies through play. TJ's business, The Playful Revolution, is focused on helping people understand the neuroscience of play and reconnect with the power and potential of play. Play, she says, is a primal need to the human body and is the neglected side of mindfulness. TJ helps people find enjoyment in the everyday, playful ways to manage stress and empowering ways to create greater fulfillment. So I know that many people, right? I'm sure would be like, that sounds great. So, TJ, I'm excited to have you here to talk about play. Welcome to the
Yeah,
podcast.
it's so fun to get to be together after so many years. And I love talking about play. So I'm stoked to be here.
Yes. So, I'm really curious when you use the word play for anyone who's like, what does that mean? Like, I'm a grown
Yeah,
up, I'm an adult. What exactly does that mean to play?
yeah,
How do you define play?
yeah. So play is a super loaded word in our culture. So I define play as being engaged with something with your enjoyment as the central focus. And so I often teach play as like sort of its own form of mindfulness, right? But not a one in which there is it is the practice of silence, but actually the practice of activating and exciting the nervous system. So it is that, like, what are you playing for? Like, what are all of the coping skills? What are all the things that you're working on? Like, what is it for? Right. And play is this practice. And so I define play as like being engaged with something with your enjoyment as the central focus. And so fun and laughter and creativity, like those are byproducts of play. They are not actually like the play experience.
That's what I was going to ask you, right? I tend to use the word fun, like, ooh, that's so fun. We
Yeah.
need to have more fun in life.
Yeah.
So, talk with me a little bit about that distinction that you just
Yeah.
made, the difference between play and fun.
Well, I think fun again is like something that we get like from the invigoration of being in the play experience. And fun, so like, and again, we often think about fun as like whimsical and frivolous, like, and that is a really valuable play subset. But fun is sort of more of like a byproduct that we experience like as a result of playing. And so like when we give people the recommendation, like, or say like, what do you do for fun, right? You need to go have fun. Like that's a lot of pressure for a lot of people. And so if you go for fun as a direct hit, like it's not going to go well, right? Like fun becomes this byproduct of like the exploration process that you go through in the play experience.
So, let me ask you, you started off by saying play is a loaded word.
Yeah.
What are some of the reactions you get from people when they hear the word play as adults?
Oh yeah. So like some of the reactions I get are like they don't have people don't have time for it, right?
Hmm.
They don't know how. Um, they don't see the point of it, right? So I think these are probably the three biggest things is like sort of not sure how to do it, when to do it, or why to do it, or what to do
Yeah.
it.
So I'm thinking about myself. I'm an
Yeah.
oldest child. So I know that when I was growing up, I kind of had this sense of like, I don't play with dolls.
Yeah.
Like, I don't play make pretend. I read books and I like science kits and
Yeah.
I like looking for bugs in the backyard.
Yeah.
For anyone who might have, I don't know, a sense of I don't know, that kind of reaction, whether it's growing up
Hmm.
or I guess what are your thoughts to people who might have that
Yeah.
reaction, and or what are some reasons that perhaps we've become disconnected from play?
Yeah. So, some studies show that like 70% of girls lose contact with the play experience between the ages of 8 and 11, right?
Mm.
And so we think about this culturally. And one, I think it's super, super normal for us to disconnect from play because really we think about play as either childish or for retirees. And then everybody else is technically in like a labor based body historically. And so, like, once you've entered a labor based productive body, like your productivity and your performance overrides like your enjoyment. And so it's super normal culturally. Like boys typically lose it at 5 and 15, and girls lose it between 8 and 11. And there's
Wow.
different reasons for the gender split. Um, but for girls, they typically lose it because this is a time that they start to really orient towards their peers and start to really care what people think. And so they start to lose their individuation um, during this time. And so many of them start to kind of compromise their personal play for a collective experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then, secondly, this is a time that, like, kind of gender based care expectations start to really turn on. Like, so good girl behavior, helping out in the house, minding your manners. Like, these are times where our expectations of girls just like turn on, right? And so the vulnerability that is like part of play just sort of becomes side like no longer is like as viable for girls at that age. Um, and similarly, like to kind of talk about the boys' history in play, like at 5, this is a time that culturally we start to desensitize boys and emotions, and play requires kind of emotions and vulnerability. And so, in order for boys to remain robust in their play, they have to remain vulnerable. And at 15, this is often when we start to see boys start to date. And so power dynamics and relationships start to drastically impact, again, the vulnerability that boys are allowed to express um, in these two specific ages. There are like these two ages that vulnerability is deeply driven down in boys.
Yeah. And as you're talking, the thing that's coming to mind is this idea of maturity,
Yeah,
right? Whether it's you need to be a big boy or a big girl and
yeah,
meeting these expectations for your age, or
yeah,
even is it as you're dating, this idea of a maturity level that you might feel
yeah,
expected to show. And how does that maybe influence our sense of okayness with play?
yeah. Right, because play is generally like it's not linear, right? Like some play is linear, meaning like it has a start and a middle and an end, like a puzzle or a Lego set or a book, right? And this is play that we culturally like approve of a lot more than nonlinear play, right? Things like playing dolls or like making potions or just like making random scratches on a piece of paper and calling it art, right? Like these are not things that we culturally approve of as much as for play because we don't see this play specifically as like productive or valuable. So culturally, we also really emphasize like linear styles of play. Um, yeah,
That's so interesting, right? And I'm thinking about myself. I'm like, yeah, it feels good to finish something, to be like, check,
totally,
read that book, right?
totally.
Did that thing, right?
Organizing the
But that,
closet, like organizing the
yep,
closet, like these things feel really good because they, again, like we live in a world that is like ripe with uncertainty, right? So
yeah,
linear play also really can be really settling for the nervous system because it closes a thing, right? It like creates a sense of certainty, which can drive down like our stress rates in the body. um because again it like brings you to that place of like kind of certainty and closure that can be really containing and regulating for our nervous system.
yeah. Well, and I'm also thinking about play as it relates to parenting. I don't know if you've like if you're into the Gottmans at all, but the Gottmans talk about play in their research and about
Yeah,
how moms tend to play with their children versus how dads tend to play. And one of their big things is the Gottmans talk about how our research specifically includes dad as an important part of this process, and that dads play very differently with children than the moms do. And I've seen some other things, people recently talking about how the way that dads play differently with children is not just beneficial for the children, but it's also beneficial for the dad. I'm wondering if you can talk about play and how that connects to parenting at all from
Yeah.
your experience.
Well, so my background, like as a mental health therapist, is like I do attachment trauma, developmental trauma, and for many years have focused on like parental mental health and like early child, like, maternal mental health. Um, and so I got really into play because I had a bunch of parents of toddlers on my caseload like a decade ago, and they were having really interesting reactions to their kids' play, where they were
Hmm.
either really like very invested in building these like kind of perfect Montessori style playrooms, right? And they were like knew that play was sacred, but they weren't necessarily like having fun doing it. Like
Hmm.
there was a lot of pressure around it, and they didn't necessarily know how to play, but they understood the value of play. And then there was this other side of parents that I was seeing, like kind of a secondary wave of like postpartum anxiety and postpartum OCD, where like toddler play was so very quickly overstimulating. The chaos and the uncertainty of it was like super overwhelming. And I just got very intrigued by parents' responses to play. And like culturally, right now, I think we have a generation of parents who are starting to value play again.
Hmm.
And like, and we're putting kids into things like play therapy over like ABA style therapy. And we're seeing like a lot of undoing of like kind of concrete behavioral work for kids in a way. And so there's a generation of adults who are starting who value play but don't actually know how to play.
Hmm.
And so I think I'm always really one of the things I always encourage people when they're thinking about like playing with their kids is understanding that when we are playing with our when we play, there has to be a power balance, right? And this is one of the things I like that I think is so important, like more on like a social justice aspect around play, right? So like if I went to go play basketball with LeBron James, right? Like we would have to make significant adjustments for us to be viable play buddies, right? Like he'd have to get on his knees maybe or get blindfolded. One time, I love this. Well, I was at a workshop and I asked this question, and somebody was like, "You could put him in stripper heels," and I was like, "Absolutely! Like that might do the game in, right?" But you'd have to shift the power balance between myself and LeBron to be play buddies. And that same sort of thing is going to happen in a parental dynamic where a parent has to be able to like take themselves out of like that teacher or that modeling position and rather like how do I enter the vulnerability of being a good play buddy. But the reality is that this is really hard for parents because we're in a totally different maturation stage of our life. And oftentimes our kids are still learning their own styles of play and they really just need us to enter almost as their like as a doll, like where we are an object of their play rather than like the intensity of the relational experience within play. So one of the things I always like kind of think is really important is that the more you know your personal play as an adult, the more capable you are of like having flexibility in the parent to child play relationship. But it is really hard to rediscover your play like in that relationship because like your kids are not your play buddies. You are their play buddies, but they are not your play buddies. And so like I always like tell, when I have parents in my caseload and they're like, "Oh yeah, like I love going on walks with my kids and like we just pick out our favorite leaves and our favorite acorns." I'm like, "Yes. If you like doing that, that's a gateway to your play. How can we pull that out so we can explore more of what you long for in that? Because at some point your kids are going to mature and they're not going to want to play with you, you
Right.
know? And so it's so important to have this sort of like deeper relationship with your own individual play that you can bring into the parenting dynamic um, in a different relational way."